Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Ethical Hacking and Network Defense. Your role as a penetration tester. So here we're going to pick up with desktop and server operating systems, or OSs. Now in Chapter 6 we learned how to enumerate systems to discover open ports that can be used to access the data and resources. After enumerating these systems, your job as a security tester, we discussed, is pinpointing potential security problems. You might also be familiar with improving security or fixing or minimizing the risk, right? So this chapter really examines how security testing is used to analyze the operating systems. We will be covering these topics today, and starting with Windows OS vulnerabilities. So many Windows operating systems have serious vulnerabilities. To improve security, most services and features they disable by default. That's an important point. They disable by default many items, right? And administrators are going to configure items to be available only when necessary, right? Least privilege, least privilege is the concept that we've talked about. So a large part of information security in a corporate setting is finding the balance between usability and security. To find vulnerabilities for any OS, you can first start with checking CVE and CERT vulnerabilities websites. So you'll go to www.cve.mitra.org. The website is on the slide. Or you be careful how you put that in, because you might get a different type of site. It's okay, there's nothing wrong with it. Just don't be frustrated. The other one is www.kb.cert.org, and you would look under vulnerabilities. Now, these are pictures of those sites, CVE on the left and the other site on the right, the vulnerability database. So the MITRE site is on the left. The Carnegie Mellon site is on the right. And so for comprehensive coverage of public vulnerability reports, you may even consider the National Vulnerability Database, known as NVD, right? NVD archives can be found on GitHub, okay? Just to point you to the right places. And you should go visit those yourselves. Now, so now as pen testers, there are other sites that are available to us, right? You may want to review this site. I found it very valuable. It's called PenTest Partners. And here's a picture of the site that you would go to, okay? You can Google that and find PenTest Partners, a British organization. Now back to Windows OS vulnerabilities. So that was where we can find a background on a lot of these public vulnerabilities. It's great information. And as a pen tester, you will have to do your own research because it's a continually changing environment. Those are some of the places where you can find that. And you can focus in on operating systems if that is your focus. That is the focus of this chapter. So back to that. Many of the explanations of the CV website can be very complex, right? For me, for you, for everybody, right? What's important, however, is that you're able to research the vulnerability that is relevant to the security test you are doing, okay? You might also have to visit the Microsoft website to see what patches or security updates are available. So there's a part 2 of your research. Again, as a security tester, you really have to be willing and able to go beyond the basics to do your job effectively. The risk register we're building is a great tool for a summary assessment, for a step 1, for a final analysis, but you want to add research to it along the way. You know, the hackers are visiting these websites. that offer exploit programs and other exploits that are out there, right? And they are going to work against these known vulnerabilities, right? So as a security tester with prior approval, right, from any company we're working with, you don't want to blow up their refinery to demonstrate the security flaws, right? I'm kidding, of course, but am I? So you want to inform the company of the systems that are vulnerable to attack and give them a good report on what they can do about it. And that's really what all of this is about. As you remember in previous chapters, we've talked about tools like Nessus and OpenVOS that will help you automate some of the processes of identifying vulnerabilities. But again, don't just rely on those tools. Make sure that you do further research at the Carnegie Mellon or CVE sites or PenTest Partners that I've already mentioned, right? Attention to detail is what separates the skillful security tester with the mediocre. So do sweat the small stuff, and research will help you with that. Now, continuing with window flaws, there are Windows file systems, right? The purpose of any file system is of the OS is to store and manage the information. So they organize information for users and users that users create, as well as the OS files that operating system is going to need too, like boot up file system, right, is the most vital part of an operating system, right? And it can be a vulnerability. So the Windows file system helps the user, and it helps the computer itself as it boots up in the OS process. So we want to be familiar with that. So one of the things important in that is the file allocation table, sometimes just referred to as FAT, right? File allocation table. So FAT is specifically a table maintained on your hard disk by any of the Microsoft operating systems, including Windows, DOS and Windows operating systems. And it acts as a table of contents to show where the directories are at and the files that are stored on the disk. So, for example, the file allocation table FAT12 is the standard file system for most removable media, for example. The most serious shortcoming of any FAT is that it really doesn't support file level access control lists, right? There's no ACL limiting who can get to them. And so they're necessary for, ACLs are necessary for setting up permissions, right? And Microsoft has addressed the problem in Windows NT and beyond. So Microsoft offers a new technology file system. This was added to support the larger files and disk volumes of Microsoft, as well as ACL file security finally. Okay, so subsequent Windows versions have included upgrades for compression, for disk quotas, for journaling, for file level encryption. That's called EFS, or encrypted file system. EFS is a subset or a capability in NTFS, new technology file system, again, that has built in now ACL capability, which is an important security tool, right? One little known NTFS feature is alternate data streams, or ADSs, written for compatibility with Apple hierarchical file system, which is great, okay? But whatever method you need to determine whether the ADS you detect is supposed to be there, because that ADS capability between Apple's and Windows can create a sort of obfuscation for a hacker to take advantage of. Potentially a better and more efficient method of detecting changes to your file system would be some sort of file-based or host-based file integrity monitoring tool. Tripwire offers, as a company, a it's called a FIM, File Integrity Monitoring. Logarithm does too, just two off the top of my head that offer that sort of capability. Now, remote call procedures, right? Remote call procedures is a protocol that one program can use, and it's going to request service from a program located on another computer or on a network without having to understand the network's details. So RPC, as it's called, Remote Procedure Call, again, is used to call the other processes on that remote system like it's a local system. So a procedure call is also sometimes known as a function call or a subroutine call. And examples of this include remote monitoring programs for control purposes, maybe remote error logging, maybe remote terminal interaction with processors, maybe submission of operating system commands from some embedded microprocessors. And I mention that because embedded processes are the subject of the next chapter. So remote RPC is this inter-process communication that allows a program running on one host to run code on a remote host, right? Again, this can be dangerous. The Conficker worm, which is a worm, a virus, but a specific form called a worm, right? It self-replicates, we've talked about. This took advantage of a vulnerability in the remote procedure call to run an arbitrary code on some susceptible host. Now, Microsoft has since patched that in 2008, but notice what happened. Conficker worm hit a month after that patch. And here's the lesson. Just because the patch is out doesn't mean that it was implemented in the systems around the world. Okay? So the patch being out can notify a hacker of a suspecting of a vulnerability that they can take advantage of if they have intelligence in their footprinting for perhaps that patching doesn't happen on a regular cycle. Then there was Stuxnet, which surfaced in 2010, and it used the same flaw that Conficker used, right? So again, still many of them not repaired. Now, Microsoft did have a baseline security analyzer tool, MBSA. It was an excellent tool. It was free to download, and as a pen tester, you could have used it. We'll talk about that shortly. It is no longer available. NetBIOS is also something to consider. Again, this is software that gets loaded into memory, and it enables the computer, as we've talked, to interact with the network resources, right? So NetBIOS isn't a protocol by itself. It's this interface to a network protocol. And so we would want to be aware of vulnerabilities there too, as it relates to the operating systems. Now, I'm going to come back with some comments about Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer in the next session.